Night falls slowly over the valley. Cold wind moves through rows of banners. Torches flicker like restless spirits in the darkness. Thousands of soldiers sharpen their swords. Horses stomp the frozen ground. Armor rattles softly like distant thunder. Across the valley, another army waits. Two kingdoms stand on the edge of war. In the royal war tent, generals lean over a wooden table carved with a map of tomorrow's battlefield. Fingers trace rivers. Daggers mark enemy positions. Every commander believes the same thing. Tomorrow will decide victory. But in the corner of the tent sits a quiet strategist. He is not studying the swords. He is studying the mind of the enemy. Because the greatest generals understand something ordinary warriors never see. Battles are not won when armies collide. Battles are won long before the first sword is drawn. Long before the drums of war begin. Long before soldiers march into the blood-soaked mud of the battlefield. Victory begins inside the enemy's mind. More than 5 centuries ago, a brilliant political thinker understood this better than most kings and generals. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli. While others studied armies, fortresses, and weapons, Niccolò Machiavelli studied something far more dangerous: human nature. And he discovered a ruthless truth about power. Most enemies do not lose wars because they are weak. They lose wars because they are proud, because pride blinds them, because ego whispers lies into their ears, because arrogance convinces them they cannot be defeated. A clever strategist does not fight pride. He feeds it, he inflates it, he sharpens it, until the enemy's own ego becomes the blade that destroys him. History is filled with kings who march confidently toward victory, only to discover they were walking straight into a trap. Because the smartest commanders do not defeat armies. They defeat the mind that commands those armies. And once the enemy's mind collapses, his army soon follows. Today you will learn 7 ruthless strategies inspired by Machiavellian thinking. Strategies that allow a commander to win before the war even begins. These are not strategies of swords. They are strategies of psychology, strategies of deception, strategies that turn the enemy's greatest weakness, his ego, into a weapon. And the first strategy begins with a dangerous principle that many leaders ignore. A principle Niccolò Machiavelli understood well. If you want to defeat a proud enemy, never attack his pride. Instead, turn his pride into a trap. Strategy 1. Turn pride into a trap. In the ancient world, pride was often the most powerful force on the battlefield. Stronger than swords, stronger than shields, stronger even than fear. Because pride makes a man believe he is invincible. And when a man believes he cannot lose, he stops seeing danger. Inside a stone fortress overlooking a mountain pass, a young king once prepared his army for battle. His kingdom was powerful. His soldiers were loyal. His victories had been many. Messengers constantly arrived with news from enemy lands. Each message carried the same report. The opposing army is weak. The enemy commander is inexperienced. They fear your power. The king smiled each time he heard these words, because nothing feeds pride faster than the belief that your enemy is already afraid. But across the mountains, another commander was watching carefully. He understood something that many rulers never learn. A proud enemy is easier to control than a fearful one. Fear makes a man cautious. Pride makes him reckless. And reckless men walk willingly into traps. This commander had studied the writings and political insights of Niccolò Machiavelli, who often warned rulers about the dangers of arrogance. Machiavellian wisdom teaches that power is not only about strength, it is about perception, about controlling what your enemy believes. And this commander decided to weaponize the king's pride. Instead of preparing only his defenses, he prepared a story. Spies were sent across the mountains. Merchants traveled through markets. Travelers whispered rumors in taverns. Every rumor carried the same message. The king is unstoppable. No army can stand against him. His enemies are terrified. Soon the rumors reached the king himself. Each message made his confidence grow. Each whisper inflated his ego further, until he became certain of something very dangerous. He believed victory was already guaranteed. When generals suggested caution, the king dismissed them. When scouts warned of strange enemy movements, he ignored them. Because pride had already made his decision. He would march immediately. He would crush the enemy quickly. He would prove to the world that his power was unmatched. This is the moment a clever strategist waits for. The moment when pride replaces strategy. The moment when arrogance silences wisdom. The moment when the enemy begins to defeat himself. The king marched his army through the mountain pass without careful reconnaissance. He did not send enough scouts. He did not suspect deception. Because proud leaders often assume the enemy is weaker than they truly are. But hidden in the narrow mountain roads were soldiers. Archers waited above the cliffs. Barricades blocked the escape routes. And when the king's army reached the center of the valley, the trap closed. Arrows rained down. Boulders rolled from the heights. Confusion spread through the ranks. The proud king who expected an easy victory now found himself trapped in chaos. And the battle was lost before it truly began. Not because his army was weak, but because his pride had been carefully manipulated. This is the essence of the strategy. Do not destroy the enemy's pride. Guide it, shape it, use it. Because pride creates blindness. It convinces leaders they already understand the battlefield. It makes them underestimate danger. It makes them ignore warnings. And when a leader stops questioning his assumptions, he becomes predictable. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this perfectly. He knew that the psychology of rulers often decides wars more than the strength of armies. A commander who studies human pride gains an invisible advantage. He can influence decisions without being seen. He can guide the enemy toward mistakes. He can win battles without even fighting. And this principle is not limited to ancient battlefields. Even in modern life, pride often leads people into traps they cannot see. In business, in leadership, in competition. People who believe they are always right stop listening. They ignore criticism. They underestimate rivals. And that is when their downfall begins. The most intelligent strategists never challenge ego directly, because attacking someone's pride makes them defensive. Instead, they allow the ego to grow. They allow the opponent to feel superior. They allow the opponent to believe they are winning. Because when someone feels powerful, they often reveal their weaknesses without realizing it. They take bigger risks. They move faster. They expose vulnerabilities. And that is when the trap closes. The battlefield may change across centuries, but human nature rarely does. Pride still blinds leaders. Arrogance still clouds judgment. And clever strategists still use this weakness to shape outcomes long before the battle begins. But pride is only the first weapon hidden inside the human mind. Because the next strategy is even more dangerous. It does not simply use pride. It feeds something far more seductive, something that makes powerful men completely lose control of their judgment. And this is where the deeper wisdom of Niccolò Machiavelli reveals its most ruthless psychological trick. Because the next strategy teaches you how to make your enemy love the very deception that will destroy him. And once a man falls into that illusion, defeat becomes inevitable. Strategy 2 reveals how to feed the enemy's vanity until it blinds him completely. And that is where the real psychological war begins. Strategy 2, feed the enemy's vanity. The battlefield was silent before sunrise. Mist rolled across the valley like a slow-moving ocean. Soldiers stood quietly beside their shields. Horses breathed clouds of white into the cold air. Across the hills, two armies prepared for the same thing: victory. But inside a war tent, far from the noise of soldiers, a different battle was being planned. Not a battle of swords, a battle of minds. The commander inside the tent studied a simple truth that many warriors never understood. Most men cannot resist praise, especially powerful men. especially kings, especially generals who have tasted victory before. Because once a man becomes powerful, he begins to crave admiration even more than power itself, and that craving can be turned into a weapon. The great political thinker Niccolò Machiavelli understood this weakness deeply. He observed rulers across Italy who surrounded themselves with flatterers, men who constantly praised their intelligence, their courage, their brilliance. At first, rulers enjoy this praise. Soon they depend on it, and eventually they believe it completely. That is the moment when vanity becomes more dangerous than any army. Because a vain leader stops questioning himself. He stops listening to criticism. He begins believing that every decision he makes must be correct. And once that belief takes root, he becomes incredibly easy to manipulate. A clever strategist never attacks a vain enemy directly. Instead, he feeds that vanity, slowly, carefully, until the enemy becomes addicted to the illusion of greatness. Let us imagine an ancient kingdom ruled by a proud warlord. He had conquered many territories. His armies had crushed rebellions. His banners flew over dozens of castles. And everywhere he went, people spoke of his brilliance as a commander. But unknown to him, a rival kingdom had been watching his rise carefully. Their strategist had studied the warlord's personality. He noticed something interesting. The warlord loved recognition. He loved hearing stories of his victories. He loved when poets described his courage. He loved when ambassadors praised his genius. This was not just pride. This was vanity. And vanity can become a chain that binds even the strongest ruler. The strategist decided to build a plan around that weakness. Instead of threatening the warlord, he began praising him. Envoys were sent with respectful messages. Letters arrived describing the warlord as the greatest commander of the age. Traveling merchants spread tales of his unstoppable army. Even spies disguised as travelers spoke admiringly of his victories. Everywhere the warlord looked, he saw admiration. Everywhere he listened, he heard praise. At first, he enjoyed it. Then he began expecting it. Soon he believed something very dangerous. He believed his reputation alone could win wars. And when a commander begins to believe his legend is stronger than his strategy, his judgment becomes fragile. Inside the enemy capital, the rival strategist waited patiently, because he knew something simple about vanity. The more praise a man receives, the more he desires it. Soon the warlord began making bold decisions to protect his glorious image. He wanted to appear fearless. He wanted the world to believe he never hesitated. When his advisors suggested careful planning, he rejected them. When generals advised patience, he dismissed them, because hesitation did not fit the image of a legendary conqueror. He began chasing dramatic victories. He wanted battles that would strengthen his reputation, battles that poets would sing about, battles that historians would write about. And this desire for admiration slowly guided him toward disaster. One day, scouts reported that a nearby fortress was weakly defended. It seemed like an easy victory. Capturing it would make his legend even greater. But the truth was far different. The fortress was bait. Hidden within the surrounding hills were thousands of soldiers waiting quietly. The rival strategist had predicted exactly what would happen. He knew vanity would guide the warlord's decision, because a man obsessed with reputation cannot resist an opportunity to look heroic. The warlord marched confidently toward the fortress. His banners flew proudly. Drums echoed through the valleys. He imagined another glorious victory. But as his army approached the fortress walls, the trap began to close. Hidden soldiers appeared across the hills. Supply routes were cut. Escape paths were blocked. The warlord suddenly realized something terrifying. The enemy had not challenged his strength. They had manipulated his ego. His desire for admiration had pushed him into a battle he did not fully understand. And by the time he realized the truth, it was too late. The battle ended quickly, not because the warlord lacked soldiers, not because his army lacked courage, but because vanity had blinded his judgment. This is the silent power of psychological warfare. A clever strategist does not only study weapons, he studies human weaknesses. He studies pride. He studies fear. And most importantly, he studies vanity. Because vanity makes leaders predictable. It pushes them to chase admiration instead of wisdom. It makes them choose actions that look impressive, rather than actions that are strategically wise. Niccolò Machiavelli often warned rulers about this danger. A ruler who surrounds himself with praise eventually becomes deaf to truth. And when a leader stops hearing truth, his downfall begins quietly. This principle still appears everywhere in the modern world. Leaders who chase attention often ignore warning signs. Companies that believe their reputation guarantees success stop adapting. Powerful individuals who love admiration often underestimate quiet rivals. Vanity creates a dangerous illusion. It convinces people they are already victorious, and that illusion can be used by a patient strategist. The smartest commanders do not insult the enemy's vanity, they feed it, they encourage it. They allow the opponent to become comfortable inside a false image of greatness. Because the larger the ego becomes, the harder the fall will be. When a man believes he is untouchable, he stops protecting himself, and that is when defeat becomes inevitable. But vanity is not the most dangerous weakness hidden in the human mind, because the next strategy goes even deeper into psychological warfare. It reveals a trick that the most cunning commanders have used for centuries. A trick that confuses the enemy completely. A trick that makes the enemy celebrate while he is actually walking toward defeat. This is where the mind games become even more ruthless, because the next strategy teaches something truly Machiavellian. How to make your enemy believe he is winning, even while you are quietly taking everything from him. And once a commander falls into that illusion, the war is already over. Strategy 3, make him believe he is winning. War rarely begins with swords. It begins with assumptions. What a commander believes about the battlefield often matters more than the battlefield itself. Before armies clash, before war drums roar, before soldiers march across the horizon, a silent war is already being fought. A war of perception, a war of belief. And the most dangerous belief an enemy can hold is the belief that he is already winning. Because victory creates confidence, but false victory creates blindness. Centuries ago, in the fractured lands of Renaissance Italy, the political strategist Niccolò Machiavelli studied how rulers behave during war. He noticed something important. When leaders believe they are losing, they become cautious. They strengthen defenses. They question every decision. But when leaders believe they are winning, they relax. They rush forward. They begin celebrating before the battle is finished. And in that moment of premature triumph, their guard falls. A brilliant commander understands this weakness. Instead of fighting against the enemy's confidence, he encourages it. He allows the enemy to believe success is unfolding. He gives the enemy small victories, small triumphs, small illusions of progress, because these illusions slowly guide the enemy deeper into a trap. Imagine a medieval kingdom preparing for war. In a candlelit war chamber, a general studied maps while messengers carried reports from the frontier. Across the border, an opposing army gathered under a bold commander. He had won several battles before. His soldiers trusted him. His king admired him, and most importantly, he believed in his own brilliance. The defending general knew defeating such a man required more than strength. He needed to shape the enemy's expectations, so he made a surprising decision. Instead of defending every position, he allowed the enemy to win small battles. A border outpost was abandoned. A patrol withdrew after a short skirmish. A supply caravan was captured. To the invading army, the signs were obvious. Victory was unfolding. Scouts returned with exciting news. Our attacks are working. The enemy retreats when we advance. Their defenses are weak. Each report strengthened the commander's confidence. Inside his war tent, he told his officers, "Our enemy lacks courage. They cannot withstand our pressure. If we push forward quickly, their kingdom will collapse." This was exactly what the defending general wanted him to believe. Because a commander who believes victory is near becomes impatient. He wants to finish the war quickly. He wants glory. And speed is often the enemy of caution. Soon the invading army marched deeper into unfamiliar land, through forests, through valleys, through narrow roads. Each mile felt like progress. Each abandoned position reinforced the illusion of dominance. But what they did not see was the design unfolding around them. The defending general had not been retreating randomly. He had been guiding the enemy's path. Every defeat was planned. Every abandoned position chosen carefully. Slowly, he was pulling the army into terrain that favored his forces. Narrow valleys, dense forests, limited escape routes, places where a confident army could be surrounded. The invading commander suspected nothing, because every signal confirmed his belief. He thought he was winning, and when a man believes he is winning, he stops searching for traps. Inside the enemy camp, celebration began early. Soldiers spoke proudly of returning home as heroes. Officers discussed rewards and titles. Even the commander imagined the glory of final victory. But the defending general waited quietly, because there is a moment in every campaign where confidence turns into overconfidence. That moment had arrived. One morning, the invading army entered a narrow valley surrounded by steep hills. Suddenly, horns echoed across the mountains. Enemy banners appeared on every ridge. Archers rose from the forests. Cavalry closed the exits. In an instant, the illusion shattered. The army realized the truth. They had not been conquering territory. They had been walking step by step into a trap. The battle was chaotic. The commander fought bravely. The soldiers resisted fiercely. But the true battle had already been lost. It was lost the moment the commander believed he had already won. This is the ruthless brilliance of psychological warfare. Instead of forcing your enemy to fear you, you allow him to underestimate you. Instead of fighting his confidence, you guide it. You let it grow until it becomes dangerous. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this clearly. A ruler who believes success is guaranteed stops thinking carefully. He mistakes momentum for inevitability, and that assumption creates blindness. The clever strategist uses that blindness. He shapes the enemy's perception. He lets the opponent see only what he wants them to see. Small victories, minor progress, encouraging signs, until the enemy becomes comfortable inside a false story of success. And by the time reality reveals itself, escape is impossible. This strategy does not belong only to ancient battlefields. It appears everywhere today, in business, in politics, in leadership struggles. A competitor may allow a rival to believe they are dominating the market. They celebrate early victories, but quietly, patiently, a larger move is prepared. Because the most devastating defeats often come after moments of confidence. When people think they have already won, they stop protecting themselves. And that is when the true strategist strikes. But even this is not the most dangerous mental weapon described in Machiavellian thinking, because the next strategy reveals something even more ruthless, a weakness hidden inside every powerful leader, a weakness that slowly destroys their ability to see reality. Because when arrogance grows too large, it blinds the eyes of the commander himself. And once a leader becomes blind to the truth, defeat is no longer a possibility. It becomes inevitable. And this is where the next piece of ancient battlefield wisdom from Niccolò Machiavelli begins. Because strategy 4 reveals how arrogance can blind an enemy completely until he cannot see the trap, even while standing inside it. Strategy 4, let arrogance blind his eyes. In every war, a commander must choose between confidence and humility. Confidence gives courage, but arrogance destroys vision. And once a leader loses the ability to see clearly, defeat has already begun. Throughout history, many powerful rulers did not fall because their armies were weak. They fell because their arrogance made them blind to reality. The battlefield does not forgive arrogance. It punishes it, slowly, quietly, until the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Centuries ago, during the turbulent age of Italian city-states, the political strategist Niccolò Machiavelli observed a dangerous pattern among successful generals. At the beginning of their careers, they were cautious. They studied the enemy. They listened to advisors. They respected uncertainty. But after repeated victories, something began to change. They started believing their success came only from their own brilliance. They believed they could not be surprised. They believed no enemy could outthink them. Confidence slowly transformed into arrogance. And arrogance quietly erased their ability to see danger. Because arrogance does something subtle inside the human mind. It convinces a man that he already knows everything. Once a commander reaches this stage, he stops asking questions. He stops listening to warnings. He dismisses troubling information. If scouts bring bad news, he ignores it. If advisors suggest caution, he calls them weak. If the enemy behaves strangely, he assumes the enemy is incompetent. Curiosity disappears. Certainty takes its place. And certainty is dangerous in war. A clever strategist understands this weakness. Instead of attacking arrogance directly, he allows it to grow. He lets the enemy feel comfortable in his superiority. Because the more arrogant a leader becomes, the less carefully he observes the battlefield. Imagine a celebrated general who had defended his kingdom for years. His victories were legendary. Soldiers admired him. His king trusted him completely. But slowly, success changed him. He began trusting his instincts more than information. He believed experience alone guaranteed victory. Across the frontier, a rival commander studied him carefully. He understood the psychological principle described by Niccolò Machiavelli. So instead of launching a direct attack, he created confusion. Strange patrol movements appeared along the border. Some enemy units retreated quickly. Others fought briefly and disappeared. Supply routes seemed vulnerable, then vanished. These signals were not random. They were carefully designed. Because an arrogant leader does not investigate confusion, he dismisses it. When scouts reported unusual activity, the general laughed. "The enemy is frightened," he said. "They are disorganized." His officers agreed, because arrogance spreads. When a leader becomes arrogant, those around him often stop challenging him. They begin confirming his beliefs, and the blindness grows deeper. Meanwhile, the rival commander quietly prepared his real plan. Hidden troops moved into position. Supply routes were secured. Forces gathered behind forested hills. The arrogant general noticed nothing, because he believed the enemy was too weak to organize such a strategy. One evening, he stood on the walls of his fortress and looked across the quiet borderlands. Everything seemed calm, predictable, under control. But in reality, he was seeing only what his arrogance allowed him to see. The next morning, the illusion collapsed. Enemy forces attacked suddenly from multiple directions. Supply roads were cut. Communication lines were destroyed. Chaos erupted across the battlefield. Stunned reports flooded the war room. How did they move so quickly? Why didn't our scouts see this? But the truth was simple. The signs had always been there. The strange patrols, the unusual retreats, the confusing border activity. Each one had been a warning, but arrogance had erased his ability to recognize them. Because arrogant leaders do not see what contradicts their beliefs. They filter reality to protect their ego, and that blindness is more dangerous than any weapon. The rival commander had not defeated the general with strength alone. He defeated him with perception. He understood that arrogance disconnects leaders from reality. It surrounds them with agreement. It silences criticism. And in that world, truth becomes invisible. This lesson still appears everywhere today. Executives ignore changing markets because they believe past success guarantees future victories. Political leaders dismiss warnings because they believe their power makes them untouchable. Competitors underestimate rivals because they trust their reputation more than reality. Arrogance blinds people in every arena of power, and clever strategists know how to exploit it. They do not fight arrogance, they feed it. They allow it to grow until the arrogant leader believes he understands everything. And by the time the truth becomes visible, the damage is already done. But arrogance is not the final weakness hidden inside the human mind. There is another force that pushes leaders into even greater mistakes. A force that makes them move too quickly, to rush into battle without preparation. That force is impatience. And the next strategy reveals how brilliant commanders have used impatience as a weapon. Because when a proud enemy becomes impatient, he begins destroying his own position. And once that happens, the war is already half won. Strategy 5. Provoke his impatience until he attacks too soon. War rewards patience, but pride hates patience. Pride demands action. Pride demands movement. Pride demands victory now. And that is why impatient leaders often destroy themselves long before their enemies strike the final blow. Throughout history, many devastating defeats did not happen because armies were weak. They happened because their commanders could not wait. They could not tolerate delay. They could not endure uncertainty. Instead, they rushed forward. And in that rush, they walked directly into disaster. The political strategist Niccolò Machiavelli understood that the true power in war often belongs to the commander who controls time. Not the one who moves first, not the one who appears most aggressive, but the one who knows when to move and when to wait. Because waiting is a weapon. Waiting creates pressure. Waiting creates frustration, and frustration creates impatience. When an enemy becomes impatient, he begins acting emotionally instead of strategically. His decisions become faster, but also more careless. A clever strategist knows how to create that impatience deliberately. He creates a situation where the enemy wants to attack, where waiting becomes unbearable. And when the enemy finally moves in anger, he does exactly what the strategist wanted him to do. Imagine a powerful kingdom preparing to invade a neighboring land. Its king was ambitious. He wanted conquest. He wanted glory. His generals gathered a massive army at the border. Cavalry prepared for battle. Siege engines rolled toward the frontier. The invading army expected a quick victory. But across the border stood a commander who understood the psychology described by Niccolò Machiavelli. Instead of rushing into battle, he waited. His forces fortified strong defensive positions deep within rugged terrain. High hills, narrow passes, stone fortifications. But he refused to march out and fight. Days passed, then weeks. The invading army remained outside the borderlands. At first, the king felt confident. "They are afraid," he told his generals. "They hide because they know we will crush them." But as time passed, something began to change. Soldiers became restless. Supplies slowly dwindled. Bad weather slowed movement. The army had prepared for a quick campaign, not a long waiting game. Inside the royal command tent, the king grew irritated. Each day without battle felt like an insult. Because pride hates inactivity, it whispers dangerous thoughts into a leader's mind. Why are we waiting? Why does the enemy refuse to fight? Do they believe we are afraid? Confidence slowly turned into frustration, and frustration soon became impatience. The defending commander knew this moment would come, so he applied small psychological provocations. Enemy patrols appeared briefly, then vanished. Scouts fired arrows from distant hills. Small groups mocked the invaders before retreating. These were not real attacks. They were psychological triggers. Each small insult fueled the king's impatience. Finally, one evening, the king slammed his fist onto the war table. "This is cowardice," he shouted. They hide like frightened animals. His generals advise caution. They warned that the terrain ahead favored the defenders, but impatience had already taken control. Pride demanded action. The king ordered an immediate advance. At dawn, the army would attack. The invading army marched into the mountain passes. Thousands of soldiers pushed through narrow roads. Cavalry struggled on rocky terrain. Supply wagons crawled along steep paths. The king believed aggression would break the stalemate, but the moment the army entered the narrow valleys, the trap was revealed. Hidden defenders attacked from the cliffs above. Archers rained arrows from the hills. Massive stones crashed onto the crowded roads. Blocked passages trapped entire units. Suddenly, the invading army understood the truth. Their speed had become their weakness. Their impatience had forced them into the worst possible terrain. And once again, the true defeat had happened long before the battle began. The defending commander had not relied only on strength. He had relied on psychology. He understood the pressure of waiting. He allowed pride to turn patience into frustration. And once frustration became impatience, the enemy destroyed his own advantage. Niccolò Machiavelli often emphasized the importance of timing in strategy. A wise commander allows the enemy to move first, because the one who moves first reveals his plans. He exposes his path. He shows where his forces will travel. The patient strategist watches carefully. He learns. He adapts. And when the impatient enemy finally commits his army, he strikes at the perfect moment. This principle appears far beyond ancient battlefields. Businesses rush products because competitors seem threatening. Investors make reckless decisions when markets feel slow. Leaders push aggressive actions simply to prove strength. In each case, impatience replaces careful thinking, and mistakes multiply. The clever strategist understands that time itself can become a weapon. He allows pressure to grow inside the enemy's mind. He allows frustration to build. He allows pride to whisper that waiting is weakness, until the enemy finally acts too soon. But even impatience is not the most dangerous weakness a strategist can exploit, because there is another force hidden inside every army. A force that spreads confusion faster than fear. A force that turns allies into doubters. The next strategy does not attack the enemy's army. It attacks the trust inside the enemy's camp. And once that trust begins to break, the army may still stand on the battlefield, but its unity is already collapsing. And this is where the darker wisdom of Niccolò Machiavelli reveals another ruthless secret. Because Strategy 6 teaches how to quietly divide the enemy from within until the army begins to defeat itself. Strategy 6. Divide the enemy's camp and let suspicion destroy him. An army may appear powerful from a distance. Thousands of soldiers, banners rising above the battlefield, drums beating in perfect rhythm. But the true strength of an army does not lie in its numbers. It lies in something far more fragile: trust. Trust between soldiers, trust between generals, trust in the commander who leads them. When that trust is strong, an army becomes a single, unstoppable force. But when trust begins to crack, even the strongest army can collapse without a single sword being drawn. Political thinkers like Niccolò Machiavelli understood this truth well. Rulers rarely fall because of enemies outside their walls. They fall because of divisions inside them, because suspicion spreads quietly, because doubt grows slowly. And once people begin questioning each other's loyalty, unity disappears. A clever strategist understands that dividing the enemy is often easier than confronting him directly. Why fight 10,000 united soldiers when you can turn them into 10,000 suspicious minds? Imagine a powerful kingdom marching toward war. Its army was large and disciplined. Experienced generals commanded loyal soldiers. Victory seemed certain. From the outside, the army looked unbreakable. But beneath this strength were small tensions. Two generals competed for the king's favor. Certain officers believed promotions were unfair. Some soldiers came from rival regions that had once fought each other. These cracks were small, almost invisible, but the rival commander watching them understood something important. Small cracks can destroy a stone wall if pressure is applied carefully. Instead of attacking the army directly, he attacked its unity. Spies entered the kingdom disguised as merchants and travelers. They listened carefully. They observed rivalries between officers. Then they began spreading whispers. Nothing loud, nothing obvious, just quiet suggestions planted inside conversations. One officer heard that another general had secretly contacted the enemy. A captain was told his loyalty was being questioned. A soldier heard rumors that certain units would be sacrificed during the coming battle. None of these stories were proven, but suspicion does not need proof. It only needs possibility. Soon whispers spread through the army camp. At first they were dismissed as gossip. But once doubt appears, the human mind begins searching for confirmation. A small misunderstanding suddenly looks suspicious. A quiet conversation feels like a conspiracy. A delayed order seems intentional. Slowly, the unity inside the army began to weaken. Generals who once trusted each other became cautious. Officers hesitated before sharing plans. Soldiers began questioning nearby units. From the outside, the army still looked strong. Its banners still flew proudly. Its formations still marched across the plains. But inside the camp, the invisible damage had already begun. The rival strategists continued applying pressure. Another rumor appeared, then another. Soon suspicion reached the highest levels of command. War councils became tense. Advice was questioned. Every decision carried the shadow of doubt. And doubt slows everything. Orders take longer. Strategies become confused. Trust disappears. Finally, the rival commander chose his moment, not with swords, but with perception. A message reached one of the enemy generals suggesting another commander planned to betray the army during battle. The general did not fully believe the message, but the rumor matched his growing suspicion, and that was enough. Arguments erupted among the leadership. Accusations were whispered. Glances became hostile. The king struggled to maintain unity, but once suspicion spreads among leaders, control becomes fragile. Soon the army marched into battle, but something had changed. Orders were delayed. Units hesitated. Generals doubted whether allies would support them. And when the rival army attacked, the divided force could not respond with confidence. Communication slowed. Coordination collapsed. Within hours, the once powerful army became disorganized. The rival commander had not defeated them with numbers. He defeated them with psychology. He attacked the invisible bonds that hold armies together. Trust. And once trust disappears, an army becomes a collection of individuals instead of a united force. Niccolò Machiavelli warned rulers to protect unity within their ranks more carefully than city walls, because enemies can only conquer a kingdom when its people begin doubting one another. Division weakens judgment. It slows action. It creates fear among leaders. And a clever strategist quietly encourages these weaknesses. He spreads confusion. He nurtures rivalries. He allows suspicion to grow until the enemy begins fighting internal battles before the real war even starts. Even today, this strategy appears everywhere. Organizations collapse when leaders distrust each other. Political movements weaken when allies compete for power. Businesses fail when internal rivalries destroy cooperation. The battlefield may look different today, but human nature remains the same. Trust creates strength. Suspicion creates collapse. And the most devastating victories are often the ones where the enemy defeats himself. But one final strategy still remains, the most ruthless mental strike of all. A strategy that combines pride, arrogance, impatience, and division into a single psychological weapon. Because the greatest strategists do something extraordinary. They make the enemy believe the battle will happen exactly where he wants it. But in reality, he has been guided there the entire time. And when the battlefield itself becomes part of the trap, Victory is no longer uncertain. It becomes inevitable. This is where the deepest strategic insight of Niccolò Machiavelli appears, because Strategy 7 reveals the ultimate mental strike: how to design the battlefield itself so the enemy willingly walks into his own defeat. Strategy 7. Lead him to the battlefield of his own defeat. War often appears chaotic. Armies move, scouts bring conflicting reports, alliances shift, battles erupt suddenly. To ordinary soldiers, war feels like a storm of unpredictable events. But to the greatest strategists, war is not chaos, it is design. The battlefield itself can be shaped, the enemy's movement can be guided, and the final clash can be prepared long before the armies ever meet. The most ruthless commanders understand a powerful truth. The greatest victory is not simply winning the battle. The greatest victory is making sure the enemy chooses the battlefield where he will lose. Once the enemy willingly walks into the place designed for his defeat, the war is already decided. Centuries ago, the political strategist Niccolò Machiavelli studied the campaigns of rulers who mastered this principle. They did not leave battle to chance. They shaped it. They influenced where the enemy would march. They influenced when the enemy would attack. They influenced how the enemy believed the war would unfold. So when the enemy finally arrived at the battlefield, everything had already been arranged. The terrain, the supply routes, the hidden forces, the escape paths. The enemy believed he had chosen the moment of battle, but in reality, the strategist had chosen it for him. This final strategy is the result of every psychological tactic that came before. Pride was manipulated. Vanity was fed. False victories created confidence. Arrogance created blindness. Impatience forced premature action. Suspicion divided the enemy camp. All these forces now guide the enemy toward a single destination, the battlefield prepared for his defeat. Imagine two rival kingdoms preparing for war. The first kingdom is ruled by a bold conqueror who believes his army is unstoppable. His generals are confident. His soldiers expect victory. The second kingdom is smaller, but its commander is patient and calculating. He understands the lessons of Niccolò Machiavelli. Wars are not fought only with swords. They are fought with perception. So instead of preparing only his defenses, he begins shaping the story of the war. Rumors spread through merchants and travelers. Stories claim that certain border territories are weakly defended. Scouts report that supply routes near a particular valley are vulnerable. Captured prisoners confirm that the defending army appears scattered. Every piece of information leads to one tempting conclusion. If the invading king marches toward that valley, victory will be easy. The valley looks perfect for conquest. It controls important roads. Its land is rich and valuable. Capturing it would cripple the defending kingdom. Everything about the target looks irresistible. And temptation is dangerous for proud leaders. The invading king studies his maps. The valley appears ideal. His generals agree. His scouts confirm the reports. So the decision seems obvious. The army marches toward the valley. What the king does not realize is that every piece of information guiding him there was planted carefully. The defending commander had chosen the battlefield long before the king made his decision. Because he understood the land perfectly, the valley looked open and peaceful, but steep hills surrounded it. Narrow roads limited movement. Dense forests hid entire units of soldiers. Hidden archers waited along the ridges. Infantry waited inside the forests. Cavalry prepared to seal the valley exits. Supply routes were secured. Escape paths were blocked. The valley itself had become a weapon, and the invading army marched directly into it. Days later, the army arrived. From a distance, the valley looked calm. No large enemy force was visible. The king smiled. This will be an easy victory. Because pride had already convinced him the enemy was weak. Vanity trusted his reputation. False victories had given him confidence. Arrogance had blinded him. Impatience had pushed him forward. Suspicion inside his ranks had weakened unity. Every psychological force had led him to this moment. The king believed he had chosen the battlefield, but the battlefield had chosen him. At dawn, the army marched into the valley. Banners waved proudly, drums echoed across the hills. Then suddenly, war horns sounded from the mountains. Hidden banners appeared on the ridges. Archers rose from the cliffs. Cavalry sealed the narrow exits. In an instant, the truth became clear. The valley was not a battlefield, it was a trap, and the trap had been prepared long before the army arrived. The king tried to organize his forces, but the terrain controlled everything. Units could not maneuver. Archers dominated the hills. Escape routes were sealed. The confident army that had marched proudly into the valley now found itself surrounded by a battlefield designed for its destruction. The battle was fierce, but the outcome had already been decided weeks earlier. Because the defending commander had not simply prepared for battle, he had created the battlefield itself. This is the ultimate Machiavellian mental strike. Control the enemy's mind, control his expectations, control his decisions, and eventually, you control where he fights. Niccolò Machiavelli believed that true power comes from understanding human behavior. Great strategists do not simply react to events, they shape them. They guide their enemies toward decisions that appear logical, but lead directly into disaster. And when the enemy believes every decision was his own idea, the strategist has achieved total control. Even today, this principle governs competition in every arena. Leaders shape situations where rivals make predictable mistakes. Competitors guide opponents into decisions where defeat becomes inevitable. Because controlling the conditions of conflict is often more powerful than fighting the conflict itself. Once the battlefield is chosen wisely, victory becomes far easier to achieve. And this leads to the final lesson of Machiavellian strategy. The greatest victories are not won through force alone. They are won through control of perception, patience, and preparation long before the battle ever begins.
Final conclusion.
The loudest battles in history are remembered for their swords, their armies, and their bloodshed. But the smartest victories are much quieter. They happen inside the human mind. They happen in whispered rumors, in wounded pride, in inflated vanity, in arrogance that blinds, in impatience that rushes forward, in suspicion that divides allies, and finally, in the moment when an enemy walks willingly into the battlefield, prepared for his defeat. This is the deeper wisdom hidden inside the political thinking of Niccolò Machiavelli. Power is rarely about brute force alone. It is about understanding human nature, understanding ego, understanding perception, understanding how people make decisions when pride and emotion cloud their judgment. The greatest generals in history did not simply defeat armies, they defeated the thinking of the commanders who led those armies. They won the war before the first sword was drawn. And that is the ultimate mental strike. Because when the enemy's mind collapses, his army soon follows. And the greatest strategists understand one final truth. The most powerful battlefield is not the land beneath your feet, it is the mind of your enemy. If this video changed the way you think about strategy, subscribe now, because the next video will reveal even deeper psychological tactics used by the most powerful strategists in history.